You know, Walter, I can't stress this enough. Your kindness is very showing, and I'd like to thank you for allowing me to stay in your castle for a bit while mine, gets, renovated.
Anything for a fellow vampire such as myself. Besides, I'm sure we can find a common interest while you're still here.
What can there be to talk about? I mean, I'm sure we have stories aplenty to tell each other, considering our mortal lives grant us this grand opportunity.
Well, considering that we're both vampires, great ones at that, this question must be asked out of curiosity. Who is your arch enemy, or do you have a nemesis?
An arch enemy, huh? Well, there was that group of fiends that broke into my castle earlier on. However, they're more so nuisances rather than actual nemesises. I'm stumped. Perhaps you can tell me your nemesises. Maybe that way it'll help re-jog my memory a bit.
I, on the other hand, have plenty of people that I want revenge on. Well, firstly, I want revenge on that traitorous Death. That sly Grim Reaper betrayed me for another. And that other being Matthias Kronqvist. I too want revenge on him. I heard now he goes by the name of Dracula, which should make things oh so spectacular. And what, to call himself the king of all vampires? The king of the night, when I held that title first? How pathetic. But those two do not hold a singular candle compared to my hatred towards that Belmont.
Belmont. Oh, I remember now. The year was 1989. Dracula's Curse was on its way to becoming the third installment of the Castlevania franchise, and with considering we had one decent game and one very fucking terrible game, we had to look only but up for the Castlevania franchise. And considering that we were in the early days of Castlevania where literally anything could have made or killed it, luckily though, it seems that we followed the former. So, for that year, Konami had plans, and those plans involved 2 games for that year. The first game being Dracula's Curse, which released December 22nd, 1989. Then the second game, well, Castlevania The Adventure, a game that came out on October 27th, 1989, being the same year Dracula's Curse, and frankly, did not need to be made whatsoever. Considering that this is one of the most forgettable games in the entire franchise, and that's saying it lightly, but oh no, it's not remembered for anything positive. No, because why would it be? Considering that this was on the Game Boy, and considering that the Game Boy is not particularly known for being the most well put together portable console, at least compared to its other contemporaries, Castlevania The Adventure has a special place in history for being one of the worst Castlevania games, if not the worst. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, come on Sarissa, it's a Game Boy game. What do you expect to come out of a Game Boy game? Oh, I don't know, fucking Pokemon? Considering by this point we've already had one bad Castlevania game after a really good, decent one, we honestly did not need 2 simultaneously back to back. Now you must be wondering, what makes this game so awful compared to the wide variety of games that encompass Castlevania's legacy? Well, let me fucking tell you. Sit down, grab your fucking popcorn, grab a glass of wine, because I know most of you are human, and we are going to listen to my story of when I played Castlevania The Adventure for the very first time. Now, back then, I got the game on my Nintendo Switch via the Castlevania Anniversary Collection, which I highly recommend that you get if you're very much looking forward into getting into the franchise. However, do keep in mind that it's only 2D side-scrollers, so good luck with that one. I picked up Castlevania The Adventure via the collection, and I played the first stage. Thought it was a-okay. It wasn't as good as something like, I don't know, Super Castlevania 4 and Castlevania Bloodlines, which was on the same system. So, really, I didn't really care for it all that much. However, it wasn't until recently that I picked up the game again, as I was in a Discord server with a group of friends that were interested in seeing me play a game. So, the game I chose to play was Castlevania the Adventure, as I never properly finished the game before all those years ago. Now, when I tell you that this game literally took my soul, crushed it, chewed on it, fucking ingested it, shitted it out, chewed on it again, and then spit it back out, I fucking mean it. Like I probably said before, Stage 1 was of no hassle. It was easy to do, the music was fun, and although there was its bullshit moments, I just readily went on by. I noticed that the game's frames were they were very much choppy to say the least, and considering that it was on modern platforms, it amazed me that it's running worse than any NES game that I've ever played. So the fact that this one Game Boy game is managed to make my CPU run at a maximum of 2 frames per second astounds me. But it gets better, because when we go to stage 2, it just goes downhill from there. When I tell you that stage 2 was one of the most annoying experiences to go through, especially on a Game Boy system and especially on the fact that it ran on 2 FPS, it was the worst. I had to cross multiple different bridges where there were monsters that had eyes on them that were constantly be rolling onto the bridge, and if you were to kill them, they would remove a chunk of the bridge, making it a freaking platform hassle. And if enough of them are killed on that bridge, congratulations, you can now no longer move on, you might as well kill yourself. And on top of that, this stage's main gimmick is the rope. And dear lord, it is so pathetically slow, and the fact that you're not able to capitalize on being able to hit anything while doing the rope animations, and considering how slow you are to climb, enemies will constantly take advantage of the fact that you're still on the rope and you can't do anything about it. So you will constantly lose health for the dumbest of reasons because you were not able to attack back. And on top of this stage is a puzzle. You are supposed to figure out in what direction you're supposed to go on, with no subtle hints whatsoever, so you end up having to do sections of the level over and over and over again. But you can't do it forever, no, because there's a fucking time limit. Then we have this stage's boss, which isn't too much of a hassle considering it's just a freaking mole, and his pattern is so predictable I can guarantee you freaking Balloon Boy from Five Nights at Freddy's could do it. Oh, but now we get to one of the worst stages in this game. Stage fucking 3. Now, this stage's gimmick is that you have to be super precise on your timing, because there are literal walls that can close in on you with spikes, and on top of that, the hitbox in this game is not very clear, so if you even touch like an invisible pixel of the spike, you're dead. And on top of that, you have to do very precise jumping, which I don't know if you know this, but in any Castlevania game where precise jumping is necessary, it's awful. The experience is awful, and it will always be awful. Once again, another example of an inconvenient enemy spawn or placement, considering that most of the enemies that will be freaking dog shiting on you for the entirety of the game are these weird little creatures that spit balls that freaking lag up the game. Oh, did I forget to mention that the spike's instant kill? I cannot stress this enough. None of the bosses in this game are actual threats. The main threat of this game is the stage itself and your capabilities being limited, considering how A, laggy the game is, B, how precise your jumps have to be, C, how fucking slow you walk, and D, considering that you have to consider every potential freaking possibility before literally doing anything. And then, luckily, to finally conclude this frickin' game, we have Stage 4, which if you thought that all your problems would have ended at Stage 3, no, they just carry over here. Considering that now we're in the castle portion, and at the end of the game, you would expect for everything to be difficult. However, the level of difficulty within Stage 4 is beyond comprehensible, considering that, like I mentioned all about this game's negatives beforehand, you have the additional negatives of it being the end of the game, and you also have enemies that don't like dying on a single hit, and they have the most bullshit methods of hitting you as much as possible. Oh no, but when we get to the final stretch of the game, being Dracula's boss fight, it is one of the most ludicrous and bullshit fights I've ever had to deal with. Because his entire gimmick is that you have to balance yourself on the stupidest platforms I've ever had the discourage of fighting. I only was able to beat Dracula through gimmicks. Gimmicks. And I had to cheat my way into actually beating him by freaking spamming in one spot particularly just so he wouldn't go to the other side. It was mind-numbing shit, but this is the kind of things I had to resort to just to freaking beat him. And thank God the Anniversary Collection had a freaking save state feature, because if I had never had the save state feature, I would have lost my humanity and never have been able to recover. This is how mind-numbingly stupid this entire game is. And like I've stated before, all the negatives that will be with you throughout the entire game, they do not leave. The bad frame rate, that follows you to the end of the game. The freaking bad platforming, it follows you to the freaking Dracula boss fight, which is the reason why this boss fight is so ludicrously awful. And as well as the fact that his patterns, albeit predictable, are some of the most mind-numbing shit possible, considering that you can understand his pattern of attack, but you'll still be hit by it regardless. Listen, you can all take it up to a skill issue, but I guarantee you, if you were in my shoes and had to play through Castlevania the Adventure in the entirety of, like, in the span of 5 hours, you would lose your sanity as well. I wasn't even able to finish it within 5 hours because I've literally had to take days off from playing the freaking game due to how upsettingly angry that this game was getting. I have friends on this planet that can vouch for every single word that I am saying because they were there when I was at the most of my anger when it came to Castlevania the Adventure. Before I forget, this game's story is practically non-existent. It's literally just you going to Dracula's castle, killing him, and getting some random mumbo-jumbo at the end of the game, calling it an ending screen. It's the same ending where we see the castle fall apart ever since the first Castlevania game. We've all seen it happen a billion times, and sometimes that effect doesn't wear off, but in this case, it's just so bad. There's nothing rewarding about this game. For anyone who is willing to experience Castlevania the Adventure, I can only tell you these things. 1. Do not play Castlevania the Adventure. Spare yourself. It is not worth it. What I can recommend you though, is that you can play Castlevania the Adventure Rebirth, which is by far a better version of the original. You could also play the sequel that this game got somehow, called Castlevania 2 Belmont's Revenge. No, it's not that Castlevania 2. But don't worry, we're gonna get to that one day. Or, I could recommend that you read the comic, which is a reimagining of the events of Castlevania's 1 and 2, Christopher's version, not the Castlevania 1 and 2 with Simon, which is kind of funny how those two parallel each other, because in Simon's case, the first game is good, but then the second game is awful, but in Christopher's case, the first game is awful, but the second game is actually decent. And hell, the comic is actually made by IDW, the same people who are now responsible for making the Sonic comics. So, yeah, I recommend it. So, this fact is just astounding to listen to, but apparently, on the Game Boy, Castlevania the Adventure was the first Game Boy title to reach 2.5 million copies sold. And to those 2.5 million, I am so sorry. The best comparison I can make to this is that if you ever gave your child Castlevania the Adventure, it'd be like giving your child Sonic Heroes. Sure, they'll enjoy it when they're a kid, but when they go back to play it again when they're an adult and they feel nostalgic, they're gonna fucking hate it. How do I know this? It's well because I recently played Sonic Heroes for the first time in a decade, and I can tell you this, it was not the same game I played when I was a child. To give a perspective as to my ranking of this game, I give this game a 1 Medusa head out of 10, because this game is just truly the epiphany of awful. No person should ever subject themselves into ever playing this stupid freaking game. Whatever people have said about the freaking Castlevania pachinko machines, or whatever the hell they said about the freaking Castlevania Judgment, at least those games function well, and at least you can actually play them with some mild enjoyment. This, however, any enjoyment that was put into this game is non-existent on the side of the consumer. It's just that bad.
Wow. Jeez. I can acknowledge that Leon was bad in my opinion, but it seems that Christopher Belmont, or whatever you called him earlier, is far worse in that pedigree. I mean, look at you. You practically lost your sanity over him.
Thank you, Walter. It's very much appreciated. No matter how many brain cells I use to try and like this game, it's just impossible. There's just nothing about it that is appealing to my eyes.
Ah, I see. Well, in that regard, I know what will both cheer us up. A good meal, as I'm quite famished due to that whole rant you were going on.
You know, Walter, I don't neglect that idea. It sounds like a good one, especially after all that. Also, by chance, do you have the Forgotten One in your basement?
Ah, you're referring to Matthew.
Thing had a name, let alone call it Matthew.
Yes, it always had a name. Just that everyone who went across it just called it the Forgotten One. Unfortunately, I haven't seen him since Leon battled him.
Ah, it makes sense. It's possible that ever since Leon battled him, he hasn't been able to recover, which, considering that his name is the Forgotten One, sure, it makes sense. He's not called the Eternal One or anything.
But now I feel like I'm forgetting something. Oh well, it can't be important if I forgot.
Now there, you are correct. You can't exactly call something important if you can't recall it to begin with. Now come on, let's go get some flesh. When is anyone going to realize that I'm still down here?